Hey, this is Davide, and the time has finally come to talk about UXP. So, housekeeping first, this is not a new podcast. The world doesn't need a new one, but the topic, UXP, the Unified Extensibility Platform, is so important that I decided to set aside the dry blog posts that I usually write and try with a medium that allows me a more extended and probably even more nuanced kind of conversation. So here I would like to match in UXP terms the HTML panels tips series that I had posted on my blog years ago, which was quite helpful, I'm told. So my intention is to cover all the basics about UXP for third-party developers. And in this first installment, I would just want to introduce you to the big news that Adobe has dropped at MAX 2020 and basically answer the following questions. What the heck is UXP? Should I care? How to prepare? Can you help? Those kind of things. And then in the next videos, which might be videos or written posts, I don't know yet, just leave me your feedback so that I know what is best for you. I will try to dig deeper on those subjects. But for the time being, let's just review the big news. It's not really that UXP has been announced at MAX because it was already there in Adobe XD. The news is that UXP is available to third-party developers like me and probably like you in one of the major Creative Cloud applications, Photoshop 2021. I haven't even touched what UXP is, but you have to know that this is the future of extensibility for all the major Creative Cloud apps, so After Effects, InDesign, Illustrator, and so on and so forth. Actually, it is already there, and this is being revealed by Adobe themselves. So UXP powers internal feature development in addition to third-party extensibility. i.e., Adobe is using UXP now, as they were using CEP, the Common Extensibility Platform in the past, to implement first-party features. For instance, in Photoshop, there's I think it's called the New File dialog. That was a CEP dialog, and it has been converted now to a UXP dialog. So those kind of features are right now implemented in Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere Pro, and so on and so forth. But they are not available to third-party developers except for Photoshop. And of course XD. So UXP API in Photoshop 2021, and in the end, this is going to get almost everywhere. And the really important bit, UXP, the Unified Extensibility Platform, is going to replace CEP, the Common Extensibility Platform, in the long run. So the Unified will beat the Common. But relax, this is not going to happen overnight. We will have plenty of time to learn the new thing and port legacy code to UXP. This is what we have been told over and over again, quote unquote, plenty of time. But we haven't been given any actual expiration date. So right now, CEP and UXP are coexisting in the same Photoshop. If you ask me what this plenty of time means, well, when you have plenty of something, you have more than one unit of that something. And speaking of time, the unit here is likely one cycle, i.e. one major version. So I would say that it is fair to expect that we'll have, at the very least, a couple of cycles, 2 years of CEP and UXP overlap. Maybe more. In my optimistic days, I would say at least twice that, so 4 years. But let's just say at the very least 2. And actually, nobody really knows. This is my best guesstimate. So in my opinion, there is no need for you to quit everything in your CEP or ExtendScript development tomorrow to start trying to port your production code in UXP. That would be, in my opinion, a very bad idea. Just get your feet wet with this technology and keep maintaining your old code bases. But UXP is definitely going to be the future of the entire Creative Cloud extensibility. That said, the first question that is fair to ask is why? Why the need of UXP? And this is a question that I also had. CEP was kind of stagnating in the last couple of years, and that was good because nothing was changing. You could just go on with your business, write code, sell stuff. But it turns out that Adobe was experiencing and trying to react to some of the drawbacks of CEP. So let me try to describe them to you. First one is likely very well known to every developer. CEP is running on one engine, which is the JavaScript V8 engine. That engine dialogues with the host application engine, which is an old and grumpy ExtendScript engine. So just for us to be on the same page, CEP, the old technology, is just an NWJS instance running in the host application. And NWJS is a way to combine the Chromium Embedded Framework, or CEF, with Node.js. So basically you have a browser and Node.js combined, and then you write some sort of supercharged web application that runs within that context. And those two, Chromium and Node, are embedded in the host application, in my case, Photoshop. And by the way, I have a course on NWJS, which is called JavaScript Native Applications for Photoshop, which is basically a way to transplant CEP panels outside of Photoshop as independent application. This is just a shameless plug because it's 2020 for everybody, guys. Where was I? With CEP, you have these two different heads communicating and sending messages back and forth. So the JavaScript V8 engine of the panel sends scripting messages as strings to the Photoshop/host application engine, which is ExtendScript based, then collects the return value. All this back and forth is not really ideal. We would like to have just one engine to rule them all. Second, every time that Chrome or Chromium or something like that is involved, you might have experience of the fact that Chrome is quite resource intensive. It's heavy, it consumes RAM and CPU cycles. So you start having more than one panel open and running, and that might have a substantial impact on your machine and performances. And by the way, it's not only third-party panels. As I said, host applications are using the same technology to support their own native features. So you might have a very large number of panels loaded in your system, and this might degrade the performances quite substantially. And these are the two main drawbacks that UXP tries to solve. Let me bring up this diagram here, which is quite scary at first, but I will try just to sum up the most salient parts. So we have a couple of problems. First problem, the two engines. And this is solved brilliantly, killing one engine. So in UXP, we have just one engine that deals with UI, so with the panel. By the way, we're not talking about panels anymore. This is against the Adobe guidelines, and they are patrolling that quite strictly. We're talking about plugins. So you will be writing and developing UXP plugins. And a plugin can contain 0 or more panels, 0 or more dialogues, which are just modal dialogues, and 0 or more commands, which are headless scripts. So if your thing doesn't really need a UI, you're going to call that a command now. So a plugin is a container of all those things together, or just one of them. UXP plugins have one JavaScript V8 engine alone, and that deals with the scripting side as well now. So we finally got rid of the ExtendScript language. This is a huge change that has some, pretty wild consequences that we will get to in a moment. Second problem, performances. In both CEP and UXP, the UI that you design is built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Actually, UXP allows a subset of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but more on that in a minute. This UI is not just shown as rendered HTML elements in the user interface. Instead, it is parsed and then converted into native controls. So your, say, HTML button is not just displayed as CEP would do, but it is converted into a native bit of Photoshop UI made of the same matter of all the rest of the native Photoshop UI. And this speeds up the whole interface quite a bit, so you're solving both CEP's main problems at once. The two engines and the reactivity of the interface / the footprint it has in your system. Actually, there is more in this UXP umbrella term. Besides the scripting engine, with all the bells and whistles of modern JavaScript, the fat arrow syntax, object destructuring, and so on and so forth, We get also a common set of APIs for networking, file I/O, and in the future, these are not yet available, imaging and machine learning as well. Let me talk about the DOM, so the scripting layer. There's this massive switch to a new JavaScript engine, and this is not a bloodless transition. For instance, all the elements that were peculiar to the ExtendScript language are gone, like gone forever. XML literal support, or the script UI library, those beloved script UI windows, they cannot exist anymore. The Adobe team has been up to this huge task of rewiring all the DOM, and the system is new. So let me try to find the right bits. You see that you require Photoshop. This new object is made available by UXP, and then you go on with the dot notation, the app, properties, and methods. But we are far from having a complete DOM. This is the target of the Photoshop team. This is what we have been told, but we're not there yet. Lots of things are missing. Fortunately, Photoshop has this peculiar thing called Action Manager, and Action Manager lets you get where the DOM can't go. So you can get and set properties, and you can perform actions. Action Manager is still there in UXP. It's even more powerful, but now it is called Batch Play. And it has a new syntax, which is kind of simpler, JSON-based. You can group different actions in an array and run them at once. It's quite fast, but the underlying structure of the actual events and descriptors is the same. One question that I've been asked quite a lot is the following. Is there a scripting listener plugin for UXP? In Action Manager, that was crucial. So is there a batch play equivalent? The good news is that there is. Actually, it's much better, and that's made by my friend, the incredibly talented developer
Jaroslav Beresa.
Sounds Spanish, but he's from the Czech Republic. The thing is called Alchemist for Photoshop, and it's kind of an inspector and a listener combined. So it's much, much more powerful. It can be found at this GitHub repo and recently in the UXP marketplace as well. Let me rewind a bit when I told you that you have just a subset of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to work with. This is very, very important. The most important takeaway here is that, I know it sounds silly, but UXP is not CP. So with CP, you were used to this idea that you were targeting something like a browser, so you could access all the standards in the world. Plus, you had Node.js. Not the case here. And I'm not saying this to scare you, but just bring you to realize that UXP is very different. Speaking of missing elements in the HTML, for instance, to date, so far, there is no canvas element. So if you need the canvas to draw your fancy interfaces in the 2D context, you're out of luck. Might be that the canvas will be introduced because of missing elements and API are still added. So probably in a month, 4 months from now, it will be available. I cannot say, but to date, the canvas is not yet there. And just to name another one in CSS, we don't have the float, which would sound quite, standard, but we don't have it. We have the flexbox instead. So we use flexbox to architect the UI. And we will have the CSS grid, we've been told, in the future, probably somewhere in 2021. So you see that there are missing parts, and some of them probably are going to be added in the future. Some others won't, and only time will tell. Speaking of JavaScript and API, there is no, or at least the last time that I've checked, there was no document.create event. And you might say, well, who cares? I mean, that's the first time that I've heard about it. Turns out that document create event is something that Vue.js, the latest version of Vue.js, heavily relies upon. And if you don't have a create event, Vue.js will not work. I have been told that create event might be shipped. I've not been able to do that, but I'm told that it can be done. So probably Vue.js, if properly massaged, will work. But these are the kind of things that you have to deal with. So forget about CEP as this beautiful large body of standards. We are dealing with a much smaller playground here. And this is also the reason why, if you're serious about UXP plugin creation, you should learn React. Because React.js is the JavaScript framework that Adobe itself uses to build their own plugins. And it works because somehow UXP is shaped to make it work. So if there's something in UXP that is missing to make React work properly, engineers will implement it. So you can be sure that React is going to work. If you want to plug in something else, you might be lucky, you might not. What else comes from Max 2020? There is this new way to deploy and look for plugins. Let me talk about the deployment first. We're happily abandoning the ZXP format, hallelujah, and we're embracing something called CCX. And this is very simple. It's just a matter of zipping the plugin folder, no signature, no timestamp, and then you rename the zip to CCX, upload it to the developer console, and submit it to the marketplace, or distribute it to your channels. The CCX, when the user double-clicks it, it's going to be opened by the Creative Cloud desktop application that performs the installation. In the Creative Cloud desktop app, there's this Marketplace tab here. I've selected all plugins and filtered for Photoshop plugins. All these entries are new UXP plugins. These have been made in the last months. This is mine too. All the rest below this, available from Adobe Exchange, is basically the old CEP marketplace. Now let me get to Photoshop, where there's this new plugins menu item, and you have a few things in here. First, you can browse for plugins, and this brings up the Creative Cloud application, or you can launch your plugins panel. This is where your licensed plugins belong. These are my 4 ones, and this is just a development thing. Then you click here, and then you have all those commands that are the same that belong to this menu here. So this is the panel, and then you see you have other entries like About, and About is a modal dialog, right? And you have the panel, the modal dialog, and as I said, there are other things that could be there, for instance, commands, scripts that you can run. Also, please know that CEP panels now are in this extensions legacy, a name that some developers haven't liked too much. But anyways, plugins are the new UXP things, and then extension legacy is the place where all CEP panels belong. So what else? Okay, tooling. Oh, well, this is good. This is cool. We now have this thing called the Adobe UXP Developer tool, which is really helpful. You can add existing plugins, for instance, like this one. You just load the manifest JSON. And well, the plugin already exists, so we can dismiss this. And you can load, reload, watch the folder so that the UXP Developers tool reloads each time that you change the source code, and also debug. And this opened this kind of Chrome Developers tool window, which is not really a match features-wise with the real Chrome Developer tool, but it's useful. You have the console, you can look for elements, and so on and so forth. And you can look at the logs, and you can also package directly from the UXP Developers tool. So create the CCX file here. And then you have other things. So this is really handy and completely new, and it helps a lot in creating UXP plugins. And you can also create a new plugin from the UXP Developers tool. So this pops up a dialog where you can enter the name, the ID, version, so on and so forth. And also select template. And you have a couple of them. One is called PS Starter, and then we have this PS React Starter. So you can think about those UXP plugin as, a simple one and the complex one. I have them both. So let me close this and get back to that. There's this one called Theme Switcher, which is, let me show that to you because it's fun. It's the simplest thing ever. It's just 4 buttons and an icon. And then you can change the UI brightness of the Photoshop interface. And by the way, you see that you have this possibility to keep the panel appearance in sync. And this is done not via JavaScript, as in CEP, but with media query. This is quite simple. You see there is an index, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and the manifest. The manifest is really important. This is where all the properties of the products are set. So the ID, the name, the width, height, preferred width and height, max width and height, icons and stuff. And then you have the plugins that use React, such as Alche, which is here. Let me show that to you as well. This one is quite more complex. You see you have tooltips, sliders, buttons, and whatnot. And in case of a more complex UI, and this is not complex at all in absolute terms, but it's more complex than this 4 buttons guy here, you should really use React. And in fact, you see all the usual React garbage. And in fact, you see all the usual React stuff. I have a bunch of components, CSS, controller, JavaScript files, and the ubiquitous manifest.json, which is here. As a code editor, you can use whatever editor you want. I use Visual Studio Code. It's just handier for me because I also need it for ExtendScript code. Because remember, you can still use ExtendScript. Those things are coexisting. Now, in my case, I'm running macOS Catalina, so I don't have access to the ExtendScript toolkit anymore, and I have to use a plugin for Visual Studio Code. One last thing that I want to mention in this introduction is, let me bring back Chrome here, is the Spectrum Web Components. So when you build a UI for Photoshop UXP panels or dialogues, you have access to Spectrum Web Components. Those SB- things. You have SB button, SB drop down, and so on and so forth. And in this website, you have a bunch of them. Mind you, not all of them have been implemented in UXP. We have just a limited set by now, but the support is growing with time. So for instance, we don't still have the switch, I think, which is here. I would have needed that, but I'm told that this is going to be available in the future. So you can use this website as a reference. Please note that if you Google Adobe Spectrum, Spectrum is a design system that Adobe has been working on for quite some time. You can find several different things. On the one side, you find the Spectrum specs. So this is just, the theoretical design system. And then you have the Spectrum CSS, which is, of course, the CSS implementation of that design system. But I don't think they are really functional. So, for instance, in the Spectrum CSS, I don't think, might be wrong, but I don't think that you can open a drop-down menu. You just have the design of that element. And then you have the Spectrum Web Components that we have seen in UXP, but you also have something called Coral Spectrum, which is by Adobe as well. And these two are a web components implementation of the Spectrum design system, but it's a different implementation of the first Spectrum web components. That's kind of strange. And then eventually you have React Spectrum, which is the React components implementation of that. So be aware that in the context of UXP plugins, Spectrum Web Components are the ones made available by default by UXP. So you can add, for instance, an SB button. Let me show that to you. Where's the button? Here, you can add an SB button, and that is going to appear in your UXP plugin. No need to import anything. You could also use native components. Let me bring up this plugin here. You can use native elements. They're not very fancy looking. So for instance, this is the range, the slider, the native range, whereas we have the Spectrum slider here, which is kind of nicer. So you should use Spectrum components where possible, because this will keep the look consistent, and they are refining those components over and over, as opposed to these dull native elements, I think that's it for this not so brief overview of the main highlights of the UXP announcement. So let me try to sum up what I've covered here. So UXP is going to be the future of all Adobe Creative Cloud extensibility. CEP is going to be faded out. It will take a lot of time. Nobody knows how long. UXP has one engine compared to the two engines of the CEP system. The one engine deals with both the UI and the scripting side. So we have an entirely new scripting engine that has a new DOM. You can use a subset of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and the result of what you write is then converted into native controls, which are faster and have a lighter footprint. We have common APIs for networking, file I/O, and in the future, imaging and machine learning. So this is really exciting. We also have a new set of tools, UXP Developers tool, and the possibility to create either simple vanilla plugins or more complex ones based on React. We've got a new marketplace and a simpler installation via CCX that is more reliable than ZXP. If it was less reliable, that would have come really as a surprise. And the entire UXP experience is driven by the Creative Cloud desktop app. In the end, if you ask me, I am quite pleased by the change. I had my problems with it because I hate change in general. But in the end, I think that this is going to bring more positive sides than negative. It is, compared to CEP, but I don't want to sound rude in that, but UXP sounds more like super polished modern version of Script UI rather than a big step into the standards direction. And this is more of a closed system, but we have to play into this smaller frame that Adobe is drawing. That said, you can find in this blog post of mine all the links to the available documentation that Adobe is currently working on, and they're doing a pretty good job. And by the way, let me thank all the people in the Adobe teams that have been supporting us third-party developers for the MAX 2020 launch. I do plan to cover all the topics that I've just briefly touched here in future videos, blog posts, audio, I don't know. Just let me know what you think and what would be best for you, and feel free to ask questions and suggest topics. I'll be happy to give you answers if I have them. If you have enjoyed this, please consider supporting me. 2020 is a hell of a year. I don't have any Patreon page, but besides my Adobe development content, you can find in the UXP marketplace there's two plugins of mine, Alce, the Advanced Local Conscious Enhancer, or WSM, about sharpening. They're for sale half of the regular price. They're $16 now. And if you happen to buy them, please leave a positive rating or a review. That would greatly help. If you cannot or don't want to, that's okay anyway. All right, thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Stay safe. Bye.